So we're here with Stan Honey on the top of North Head, just looking over the fleet racing and the umpiring system that's being used for the America's Cup. How long have you been trialling this system, Stan?
We've been working for about 6 months total on it, and we've had trials in simple measurement trials in Valencia. We operated a little bit at that 1851 regatta, and then we had 2 different trials in San Francisco using monohulls. But this is the first time we've really trialed it with the AC-45s, and we've been working here for a couple of weeks.
So what's the objective of the system over using the normal umpire boats?
Well, the principal objective that triggered the investment in the system was to enhance the TV experience and to give the commentators and the producer and director the ability to better explain what's going on in a sailboat race and to be able to render lay lines and head behind lines in the live video instead of having to go to a virtual rendering. But once we had that data, then the umpires and the race managers decided to use that to manage the race and to umpire the race. And for umpiring, the principal objective or the principal advantage is that there's certain things that can now be determined objectively, whereas in the past in sailboat racing, the exact status of an overlap at the instant of zone entry was something that was difficult to judge for the umpires and for the competitors. And so as we all know, in many events that did have on the water umps, the umps would make the call and it would be a shared assumption. But in this environment, the umps have the actual data, so they can determine objectively exactly, within 2 centimeters, whether there was an overlap or not at the instant of zone entry. And so then the competitors, they have to judge it using their best judgment, and if they're aggressive and stick it in and they weren't entitled to room, then they get a penalty, and if they don't stick it in and they were entitled for room, then they're going to have a difficult interview with you after the race.
So one of the issues that used to happen with the computer graphics system was the delay between where the boats actually were on the course, the signal getting out and then getting onto the screen. How real time is this?
The rendering of the diagrammatic view of the race that the umpires look at, the positions of the boats are synchronous to one another, within a millisecond. The entire view that the umpire is looking at tends to run about 1 second behind real time. And so from the standpoint of the timing of an umpire call, a 1 or 2 second delay, hardly delays that call, but the umpires are able to make that call objectively, with the actual measurements.
So you're using very simple graphics there compared to what we've seen in the past. What's the point of that? Is that just to up the speed of the whole show or what?
Well, in the past, the virtual viewer, like Virtual Eye, uses gorgeous graphics because they're rendering the positions of the boats and so forth in a virtual world. And to take those graphics onto TV, they had to solve the very difficult problem of rendering water realistically in the background and the sails and all of that. When we do it for TV, we cheat. We don't have to render the sailboats and the water and the land because we're using helicopter video. We have to instead solve the very difficult problem of measuring exactly where that helicopter is and where the boats are to within a few centimeters and a fraction of a degree in order to render the graphic insertions accurately, which is the head behind lines and the lay lines and so forth. From the standpoint of the umpires, they don't need and they don't want fancy rendering of the water and the shorelines and the sails. What they want is a diagrammatic view of the race showing them the properties of the race that they're most interested in, which is the exact status of an overlap at the instant of zone entry. So they want a perfectly rendered zone around the marks, and they want a perfectly rendered line, and then they want the computer to tell them what that overlap status was at the instant of zone entry. So the umpire determination, it's actually they always want to see it from above. They don't want to fly around and look from all different perspectives. And they just want to see a very clean indication of the objective status of those boats at the instant of zone entry or at the instant of the start.
So when the umpires are working in there in the room, they're looking generally two umpires looking at two screens. What's the screen on the right and the screen on the left showing?
You know, every day it's been different. This is this is a work in progress, and we're working with the umpires to figure out what they want and what tools they want and how it should work. And literally every day has been very different. I suspect, you know, judging by the work we've done with other sports, such as, you know, NASCAR and other motorsports groups and baseball and football in the official systems, I suspect you'll eventually see a very simple diagrammatic viewer that the umpires control, and they can control it in time, and they go back to the instant of zone entry and look at it. But I suspect at the end of the day, they'll also look up and they'll see synchronized video. At that same instant, they'll have a chance to take a quick glance at the helicopter video that we've captured and synchronized and, you know, positioned at that same instant in time. But the principal determinations will probably be made from the diagram, but the umpires will, you know, certainly like to have the video that's, you know, synchronized to that same time. And that's exactly what we did for, you know, for NFL and in some cases for NASCAR.
So how is this exercise related to what you've done with other stadium sports? There are a lot of new issues there, or is it just really relaying the old technology over a new environment?
It's some of both. You know, in other sports like, you know, hockey and football and baseball and motorsports, at Sport Vision, which is a company I founded in '98, we, you know, would render graphic elements into the live video of a sport to make it possible to see something that was important to the sport and hard to see, like the first down line in football, or like who is who in the backstretch of a motorsports event. In this case, it's very similar to that in that, you know, we're rendering into the live helicopter video of the sailing race things that are hard to see and important, such as the ley lines and the head behind. And of course, the ley lines are important because, as sailors know, there's a bunch of difficult decisions you have to make as you approach a ley line. You know, especially, you know, with a competitor nearby. You know, are you going to attack in front of them? Or are you going to cross behind them? You know, there's pitfalls to each of those decisions. And yet, if you can't see where the ley line is, it's harder for a commentator to explain what the problems are. So in a sense, the system we're building is similar to what at Sport Vision we did for a lot of other sports. But the thing that makes it different and much harder here is that all of the previous Sport Vision systems worked from cameras that were mounted on tripods. And the advantage of a tripod-mounted camera is you know where it is, and it's relatively easy to measure its pan and tilt because you can measure it relative to the tripod, whereas this system that works in a camera video that's in a helicopter, and the helicopter is moving all around and bobbling around, and so we have to both measure where it is really accurately as well as measure its angle extraordinarily accurately, because if the helicopter is 1,000 feet away and it moves a little bit in angle, then your rendering has to be done very accurately and angled to keep the graphic elements from sliding around on the water. So what we've done is we're working with Sport Vision to extend the Sport Vision technology to enable it to work from a moving camera in conjunction with, you know, very, very precise live real-time measurements of the location and attitude of that camera.
So is that really what you're going to be trialling next week with the TV trials?
Exactly right. We're equipping the helicopter with our sensors to measure the position and attitude of the helicopter very accurately, as well as a modified camera where we can measure the pan, tilt, zoom focus of the camera very accurately. And obviously we're measuring its angle relative to the helicopter. And then we'll be putting in, you know, simple graphics here next week, such as the ley lines and the ahead behind lines and so forth.
Okay, well, thanks very much. We'll look forward to catching up again next week.